Hey Kids Cook Real Food. Let's talk about kids and food. And we always as parents want our kids to have a healthy relationship with food because we know the cascading effects of negative things that can happen in their life if they don't. So I'm honored here today to have Heidi Schauster. She is an expert on eating disorders, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about building a healthy relationship with food for our kids. Thank you so much for being here, Heidi.
Thank you, Katie, for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this is going to be fascinating. Let me catch you up a little bit on Heidi's background. She's actually a certified eating disordered registered dietitian, not eating disordered, eating disorders. Whoops, registered dietitian. Over 20 years experience in the field, so she's seen a lot. She's the founder of Nourishing Words Nutrition Therapy in the greater Boston area, and she's an instructor in the Eating Disorders Institute graduate certification program at Plymouth State University. Now, she's also the author of Nourish, which is a great book that came out in 2018, How to Heal Your Relationship with Food, Body, and Self. She's also a health at every size practitioner. We're going to talk about that a little bit today. And Heidi really encourages embodied eating and living for all. We'll also unpack that a little bit. And she even facilitates no diet book clubs and supervises other dietitians locally and virtually who treat clients with disordered eating. So you guys, we seriously have an expert here. In her time when she's not doing all of those amazing things, she's actually a lifelong dancer and proud mama to 2 teenagers, and can be found in the throes of dishwashing dance parties and digging around in her garden. Thank you again. Welcome again, Heidi. And I'm really excited to jump into this topic. Tell us a little bit about you. How did you find this passion and this focus on working with food and body image?
Great question. And it's so interesting to sit and hear you read my bio. I'm like, really? That's me? But yes, I mean, my history and my interest in this topic comes from my own lived experience in part. I was a young dancer who did not know how to fuel her body well. And so I struggled with my own eating disorder, which I recovered from, in my late teens and early 20s. And then nutrition, because it was part of my healing process, I learned about nutrition and actually realized I could eat a lot more food than I initially had thought based on the diet culture that was around me in the ballet world. I felt like it was so healing and helpful and wanted to continue to learn and ultimately help others who might be struggling with their own relationship with food and their bodies. So,
wow, I'm sure your experiences really help you empathize with patients and clients, and I'm sure that they trust you more, knowing that you've been where they are, you're on the other end of the tunnel now, you're at the light, and you're living a healthy lifestyle without worrying about diet and weight, which is kind of your whole passion, your whole mission. Hey.
Yeah, I hope that increases trust. I didn't start sharing about my own history initially in my work. I probably was in the field for about 15 or more years before I actually shared that. I think I needed more experience to just be able to digest the kinds of questions that would come up around that, and also to be able to have professional boundaries around disclosing my own recovery. Obviously in session, that's not the time to talk about my history because the sessions are about my clients. But I started to write more publicly in my blog, and that's when I disclosed a little bit about my history. And I think in some ways, yes, it does give me some empathy, although my experience is certainly going to be different than the experience in front of me.
Absolutely. But, I just heard someone say the other day, a story not shared cannot serve. And so you're definitely serving the online community. It's the perfect forum to share that. People really want to know that they're not alone in their struggle.
Absolutely.
Now, I noticed the name of your clinic is Nourishing Words Nutrition Therapy. And I'm just a curious soul. I don't know, why the word?
Well, Nourishing Words is something I've used for a while. And, I'm a communicator at heart. I use words either in writing or counseling, teaching to, express and work with people. So that's where that came from. When I was a a 4-year-old, my mom noticed I had a lot to say and got me a diary. I couldn't write yet, but I dictated to her. So I've been really a lifelong writer, like for my whole life before I could write. So for me, words are powerful and meaningful and helpful. And it's interesting, as I'm like practicing more and more in this field, I'm actually learning that words are powerful, but they can only go so far, and that embodiment, or connecting with one's own body in a way that's not very verbal, is also part of the healing process. So
this is all going to be fascinating. So yeah, you're really healing through the nourishing words, nourishing food, and connecting with the body. That's so cool. And the book, you guys, the book Nourish is great. I mean, really well written. You can really tell that, yeah, you are a communicator. You're not just someone with a bunch of head knowledge. You're able to express it in ways and explain things in ways that, I mean, I read it. I don't know. I think I read it in one sitting, just like taking it all in. Yeah, it's very good. So we want to talk about kids. You're an eating disordered specialist, and no parent wants to see their child go down that path. So what are some risk factors for kids who develop eating disorders? What's kind of going on in their lives? And then are there any things words especially, that parents need to cut out of their language to avoid setting kids up for an unhealthy relationship with food?
That's a good question. In terms of risk factors, I would say that there are some significant temperamental risk factors. The same thing that makes a kid actually a good athlete might make them someone susceptible to an eating disorder. Perfectionism, a drive for achievement, kind of general driven nature. So yes, there are some temperamental risk factors. There's also eating disorders run in families. So there is a genetic component, the research has shown. And then there's our cultural factors, right? We live in an environment generally to us evaluate our bodies in negative ways. So our culture definitely plays a part. So I like to think of an eating disorder, it's not really about one factor or another. It's like a whole soup of different factors that come together and make a child more susceptible. Mm-hmm. So, I didn't even list all of the different kinds of factors, but that just gives you a smattering. And in terms of your second question, which is what can parents do or say? Ultimately, the best thing I think that you can do as a parent is to not talk negatively about your own body in front of your kids. Easier said than done, right?
I was going to say that's a big ask in our culture. It's so a part of our language, but to think of it as this is a part of my parenting. And if I'm an intentional parent, I've got to cut that out of my language. That's a really important message.
Yeah, if you give the message there's something wrong with your body, well, chances are that child is going to look a little bit like you at some point, and you don't want them. If you're bashing your thighs in front of your daughter, for example, she may think there's something wrong with her body too. So I think that's one really basic thing that parents can do, is to really kind of keep that negative body talk away from your kids. And if you struggle with that, get some help with it, because there are people that are willing to help when you struggle with your own relationship with your body.
Yeah, definitely. So, here at Kids Cook Real Food, we are all about helping parents raise amazing children. That's why I do this series. That's why I'm so excited to talk to you. And I know we would all agree, we really want to eat our kids to eat healthy food. We want our kids to understand why it's important and how to take care of their bodies. And now I've done lately interview after interview with pediatricians and nutritionists, and they all say we got to eat less sugar, we got to eat more leafy greens. And then I read your book, and I kind of feel like you say, well, don't say foods are bad. And it makes me worried, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally tell my kids sugar is bad. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I know I'm not alone in that. And, if you just ask me or anyone in the audience here out of context, oh, do you want your kids to be overweight? Do you want your kids to develop an eating disorder? We'd be like, well, no, of course not. But probably some of the habits that we have could be pushing our kids in that direction, just like you just talked about. I know I've said, oh, I don't like these pants, I feel fat today, or whatever. Oh my gosh, I'm gaining weight. And I just think, oh, I don't think about how that affects my kids, but it's really obvious as soon as I turn on my cognition and think about it. So how do we teach kids about healthy food and unhealthy food without creating like an orthorexia, the worry of everything that goes in your mouth, and that, or that sort of mentality that would undermine a healthy relationship with food?
Question. And ultimately, I think we all are growing up in the same culture. You and I are, we're not perfect parents, right? We're just slogging through like everyone else. So I think we have to have compassion first for ourselves, but ultimately to be able to create a healthy relationship with food for a young person who's really imitative, especially young children. They just imitate and watch us, whether you think they are or not. The best thing that we can do is really just model what we believe to be balanced, healthy eating, and not have any kind of a restrictive mindset around food. And when I say restrictive, obviously that doesn't mean like, you send your kid to the candy store and say, eat everything you want. Like no parent would do that. And we can talk more about that if you want, in terms of sort of what it's like to create some limits with kids. But ultimately, we want to create a mindset that's not restrictive, that doesn't put food in good and bad categories, so that we create guilt and stress around food. Because guilt and stress around food is not healthy eating. It's not good for our systems, our nervous systems, to be stressed out about food. And we don't want to encourage our kids to feel stressed out about food when they're making their choices. We want to look at them as choices. There's not good or bad. There's just choices. And some choices maybe make us feel a little bit better than others. And encourage your kids to really listen to their bodies too. My daughter, if she asks me like, well, can I have this? I'll often say, well, is that what your body wants? Like, does that feel like what your body's wanting right now? And she might pause a little, because that's different than saying that's what my mouth wants. Like, is that what your body wants right now? So it's sort of like trying to keep a balanced perspective around food, which is easier said than done. I think it's a little bit more of an art than a science, actually.
Yes. And I was thinking, this is really the long game. Like if I went, out into my kitchen right now, and if all my kids were home and I said, well, guys, what does your body feel like eating right now? You get to choose. Like, I guarantee the 3-year-old would go for the candy drawer for sure. So, I mean, there's got to be some balance of age, but also this again is not something you can just flip a switch on. It's a long discussion of the difference between how your body feels and how your tongue feels. And just to get kids in connection with how their body does feel. I don't know if I'm always cognizant of what things make me feel bad, and what doesn't, but it's really important. Do you have sort of an like age by age recommendations? Do they change?
Well, I think that I don't know that I have like a set criteria for each age, but I think like developmentally, young kids need more limits. Like I said, you wouldn't send, your 3-year-old to the candy store and say, eat whatever you want. You might say like, okay, here's $2, or here's like a little bag. You may fill that up. You might kind of give them a little gentle guidance. As they get older, you're going to be giving them less and less of that guidance, and they're going to be making more of their own food choices. So you want them to have the self-regulation skills to actually make choices that are balanced, and to know that, like, yes, if I eat a whole huge bag of those candies, then I'm going to feel sick. So you want them to have, some guidelines, especially when they're young. And obviously it depends on the kid. Every kid's different, but I love Ellen Satter. I don't know if you know her work. She is wonderful, and she has this kind of mantra that I think really makes sense. And that is that, and I may not get it exactly the way she does, but the parent's role is to actually make good, balanced, healthy food available. And it's the child's role to actually decide how much and when to eat it. And obviously, there are going to be some set meal times and snack times, especially with the young child, to kind of give them some boundaries around those eating times. But ultimately, if a child says they're hungry, we don't want to say, well, no, you're not hungry. Like, you have to wait until set snack time to eat. Ultimately, especially if you're just at home, it's like, oh, okay, well, then listen to your body. What does your body feel like having? And have a dialogue with your child about it, so that you're not actually telling them what to eat. I think what Ellen Satter says is that when you kind of like move into their territory and you start saying, eat more of this or eat less of this, then, and we all do it, myself included, even though I know better, it's just, how can we not, when we have, a nutrition degree and we want our kids to grow up healthy and happy, right? But ultimately, we need to stand back as parents and let them kind of make those choices and learn how to regulate and learn what foods feel good and don't feel good and what their own preferences are. And we don't really want to go into that territory. If they have questions, absolutely. But we want to try to let them kind of trust their bodies and be able to listen to their bodies. And that's something that a lot of us as adults lose, especially anyone who's struggled with compulsive eating. I do it myself. If I'm eating lunch and I'm, reading my email, I'm not actually really consciously registering what I'm eating. And so, we actually encourage our kids and work on it ourselves, the more likely we're going to actually get it right in terms of like what's healthy and sort of right to eat in any given moment.
Mm-hmm. I think that losing consciousness of when we are hungry and not, I fear that that's happening younger and younger, just because I do see lots of kids who do snack all day. And I hear from a lot of parents whose kids aren't eating good lunches or good dinners. And as soon as they implement a rule of creating some space between snacks and meals, they're like, oh, they just were snacking too much and they weren't hungry. Yes. So just saying, what are you hungry for? Oh, you're hungry. What are you hungry for? I think there has to be definitely like a pre-conversation, like, let's make sure you're really hungry and not just bored or tired or excited because you happen to see a candy bar. I'm hungry. I'm suddenly hungry. I saw the package of cookies on the counter. And then, I'm assuming the food you have in your house is a big part of this discussion too. If you have mostly healthy foods, is that kind of a parent's way of guiding kids into healthy choices without necessarily like verbalizing this is good food and this is bad food?
Yeah, I'm even careful about like categorizing foods into healthy or unhealthy categories with kids. Again, because when we call something unhealthy, we're sort of saying it's bad, and that creates sort of a judgment. And so for little kids, it might create some fear, and then as they get older, they'll want more of it. Just, I see this in practice. I think that when families restrict sugar, for example, a lot, those kids will find the houses that like have like sugar and they will hang out there, just so you know. I see it happen. Like,
you know what?
Kids don't eat their Halloween candy. They kind of like eat a little and it kind of sits there, but their friends find it who might again have like more restrictive households around sweets. So I do, that's my own like kind of decision to sort of keep no foods off limit. And my kids have grown up learning to manage that fairly well, and all children are different. So I think, I don't want to say that that's across the board the way to parent, but ultimately I think we have to be careful because restrictive foods become more charged. And we don't want to make any particular kind of food more charged. We want like, the cookie and the soup to sort of be, kind of neutral, so that like when the kid really is like needs some nourishing, moist food, they go for the soup. They don't just always go for the cookie because that food is so charged and they want it all the time. Does that make sense?
It does. And you're saying, when you say charged, you kind of mean emotionally and psychologically charged. Like, yes. And I do notice this, like the moment I'm Catholic, and so usually I'm giving up something for Lent. The moment Ash Wednesday hits, I'm like, want that thing more than ever. So when I read in your book that you talk to groups of parents and say, I will tell you how to make your child into a binge eater. And all the parents get their pencils out and they're like, okay, I'm ready to write this down so I can't do it. And then you just tell them, restrict a food. Tell them a food is off limits. And that like causes the reverse to happen in their brain and they become binge eaters. And I'm like, oh gosh, because that's always kind of been my husband and I talk about our own fear, I guess, or worry. Like if we restrict too much, is the pendulum going to bash toward the other side as soon as they leave the house, or as soon as they leave, completely leave our house as young adults? And that is always our fear. So we, in our house, we have a 1 dessert a day rule. And that's more restrictive probably than you have. It's less restrictive than some people. I'll read about people who, oh, my child never has sugar. And I'm like, oh gosh, maybe my child should never have sugar. Maybe I'm doing them a disservice. But anyway, parenting's hard. Parenting's really hard.
It's like the toughest job ever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what you've done is you set a reasonable limit and then you stick with it. I actually don't think the limit itself is really all that important. Like whether you're a dessert once a week kind of family or you're a dessert every day kind of family, I think like the key is that you have something that you can live with, that you like enforce it, and don't get, you're not wishy-washy about it, but it's not rigid, so that if there's like a special evening and there's food associated with it, there's some flexibility. And that like as the child gets older and starts to ask more about, well, why do we have this rule? You have a respectful dialogue about it. Mm-hmm. And maybe even revise it potentially, because you're giving a little and they're giving a little. So I think that it's that communication, I think, that's so critical. And that can, that helps food just sort of take its place as like one of the things in a child's life, and one of the things in this, again, then this young adult's life that they take care of themselves with, but it doesn't get so charged.
Mm-hmm. So definitely, like in our own home, like when we do have Halloween candy, sometimes they get the big size, and so my kids will say, "Well, I want to have these Skittles. Like, how many am I allowed to have?" And usually about 5 or 6, I'll start to say, how many do you think is an appropriate amount for a 5-year-old? And my kids amaze me, actually, mm-hmm. because often, like sometimes we will say, oh, why don't you have 5 because you're 5? And so they'll like kind of take that, like, oh, I think I should have 5 because I'm 5. And I'm like, 5 Skittles? Like, I just totally scored on that one. That's like not very much at all. Or they'll say 6, or, it's almost, they almost always say something that I don't even feel like negotiating with. It's like the great answer. So that helps. And like my bigger kids, when we are at parties, well, what am I allowed to eat? And I'll say, well, I trust you to make your own decisions. And at first they're a little surprised always, but I think that kids appreciate that acknowledgement of maturity, right? That we're letting go a little bit. Do you have any like dessert rules?
I mean, I think what you've done is you're respecting. Yeah, no, you're respecting their, sort of their own agency around choices. And that's really that's really what we do like multiple times a day with food. We just make choices. It doesn't have to be that angst ridden. I think our culture makes it angst ridden. And the sort of myriad of sort of health and nutrition information that's out there, like whether it's, research based or not, that makes it angst for them. It doesn't have to be. It's just choices. And I think if you have that sort of attitude about it, and you're sort of respectful that their bodies actually, are contributing to their choices, and like they can make their choices based on what's going on with their bodies, then you're helping them have a good foundation for, their adulthood, when life is going to get crazier and busier, and you want food to be one of the ways they still take care of themselves.
Right. I love that philosophy, and really looking at it as it's not just today's choice. It's how we create good choices for the rest of their lives. Now, I know a lot of parents, I hear this probably more often than anything else. How do we deal with the food that other people are giving our kids? The banks, the church Sunday schools, the school birthday parties, and, hey, happy treats. They're like, some teachers give kids Hershey's Kisses every day for being smart. They call it a brain kiss. How do we teach our kids to manage this onslaught of sugar, which may not be bad, but does do bad things in our body, right?
Well, yeah, the jury is still out. I mean, the research has shown really that the worst part about sugar is really our teeth. It really affects our teeth worse than anything. And yes, like eating lots of sugar by itself. I mean, I teach this to my own kids, like eating lots of sugar by itself is not going to like help you get through your soccer game. For example, it's like, you might feel a quick burst of energy, but then you're going to crash. So helping them understand that having a snack that has a little bit of carb and a little bit of protein and a little bit of fat will actually give them more mileage when they're old enough to have that little educational piece. When you have a young kid, it's really hard, to manage, like you said, like sweets that they might be given. And I think, teaching them to pause and, that asking you at first and then eventually asking themselves, do I really want this, is important. Like, do I really want this? Is this really what I want to eat right now? And maybe it is. And I think, that's okay. Like, that's how we learn what things feel good and what things don't feel good and what things taste good to us and what doesn't. So I think actually allowing that process of, embodied eating where you experiment and try different things, and if someone treats from a particular source, to say like, oh, how did it feel when you ate all of that candy, for example, like, on Halloween, night, when you ate a ton of candy, how did that make you feel? And, oh, they could say, really, I had a tummy ache. I'm like, okay, well, that's important information about like what your body really likes and doesn't like. And just,
I know. I always
being very
hope my kids-
straightforward about it.
Yeah, I always hope my kids will get a tummy ache if they overindulge, like an immediate sensation, so they notice. But this is good for parents to remember too. Like, part of our job is to help kids be cognizant, right? So if we know they've had a school party or, they've eaten something that maybe we wish they hadn't, rather than say, oh, I wish you hadn't eaten that, which is like kind of the natural knee-jerk tendency.
Yeah.
Say, how did you feel? How do you feel?
Right.
Did it give you energy? Did it make you tired? And maybe it didn't. Maybe they're like, I feel fine. Like, I feel normal. I feel like me. But we can continue to have those conversations and keep crossing our fingers. I know my son when he was in fifth grade 3 years ago, he totally overindulged at his school Halloween party and had some serious digestive repercussions. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry you feel this way, honey. And I just let him process it. He totally got it. He was like, oh, yeah, I really messed up. And I was like, yes, inside. I thought, this is so good.
And it's not that he messed up. He just learned through experience. It's like, because I think we have to be careful about judging. Like, I think we do it ourselves. Like, oh, I screwed up. I ate something bad. Like, we want to watch that language. It's more that like, oh, I learned that this doesn't really feel so good in my body. I like to try to be curious about it and not critical. And I think that's a good foundation too. And I think your son, he had some natural consequences that like kind of will teach way more than anything that you could have said. And in fact, I think kids need to learn that. And the kid who says like, oh, I ate a whole bunch of candy and I felt fine, that could be possible. Like, kids are pretty, like, they need a lot of calories and their brains need a ton of carbohydrate because they're growing. And so sometimes actually, they eat a bunch of stuff that like maybe would make us as adults feel awful, but it doesn't affect them. And I think that that's their experience and that's okay. And it may be that they just need extra calories because they're active kids. And I think us getting anxious about it doesn't serve anyone. In fact, the more kind of chill we can be around food, the more likely they will develop kind of a chill relationship too.
Which is probably the best relationship for truly healthy eating.
Yes.
Listening to your body. Now, what about this war on childhood obesity? What do we do about that?
Well, I don't really believe in, actually, I don't believe in health by stigmatizing a body type. So, for example, fat is really just a body type. And, if we want to encourage health in our kids, we can encourage their habits, good habits around eating fruits and vegetables, eating a wide variety of foods, eating regularly, exercising regularly. But I think focusing on weight as the determinant of health is really misguided. I think we've been really barking up the wrong tree. If you look at the research, and I really encourage people to do that, you'll see that that weight is not a determinant of health. Habits are, and sometimes weight correlates in there, but correlation is not the same thing as causation. And so I think we have to be really careful that kids and adults come in lots of different body sizes. And you can be fit and healthy at any body size if your habits are in line with fitness and balanced eating. And I think that is the message that I'd much rather put out there because it doesn't stigmatize any particular type of body.
This was so challenging to me in your book
Mhm.
because I know in our family we will say, oh, so-and-so is getting so heavy, or oh, did you see that family? They're all so heavy. We worry so much about their health. And I mean, we totally do it. So for me to read, to be reminded that, something that I have known and have read, that there is health at every size, especially when we within a family, if we see how they eat and we go, gosh, they are eating kind of well. Like, I don't understand why they're so heavy and unhealthy. That language is really telling my kids that weight is equated with health. And so I think, this is going to be life-changing for me, or at least, communication changing for me, to remind people that we can't judge the outside. We shouldn't be judging anything, but we shouldn't even talk about the outside as health or unhealth. But those
Right.
habits, that's so key. It's critical to understand.
Right. And I think that's like something that not just, you and I as parents need to sort of shift our language on, but our whole culture. We could talk for another hour on that if we wanted to. But, when my daughter said to me that her friend of hers was complaining about being so fat, and she told me that her response to that was, well, you're not fat. And even if you were, who cares? Like, that's just another kind of body. I was like, wow, like it really sunk in. Like, the 12-year-old like somehow got the message, I think that was last year. So I think, we can change our language around it so that we're not just saying, oh, you're not fat, but we're just, we're actually just promoting about person and not talking about fat as being important.
Yeah. Are there specific, so health at every size, guys, by the way, like all capital, capital letters, it's a thing, it's a philosophy. Is there anything inside the health as every size teaching or philosophy that parents really should know beyond that as we try to build healthy relationships with food in our kids?
Well, if anyone wants to take a look at health at every size, you can Google it and understand some of the principles. But basically it just says that we all come in different shapes and sizes, and we can all impact our health positively by making choices. It's plain and simple, and we can be healthy no matter what kind of body we have in this moment by, making healthy choices, making choices that move us towards health. And obviously that's going to vary for the individual and maybe even for the day. So, but really kind of accepting our bodies instead of berating our bodies is probably the best place to work on our health habits.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And accepting the body, but realizing that if your health is poor, there are habits you need to change regardless of body size, basically.
Oops, there you are.
Oh, okay.
I lost you for a moment.
Yep. No, I was just saying, you see sometimes on social media, people swing back the other way and they're like, oh, fat is beautiful, and almost laud really, really heavy individuals. And I think, well, I don't know if that's healthy either, because if those people do have unhealthy habits, I don't know. Is there a balance between just realizing that if you're actually physically unhealthy, you have, your doctor is saying you're heading down a bad path or whatever, or not a bad path. We got to get that word out of our language, right? You're heading down an unhealthy path. You're heading towards some diseases, in your future or in your present. You need to change some habits. That's the kind of language we want to talk about regardless of size.
Regardless of size. Yeah. I'm grateful that there are people out there who are embracing their large, beautiful bodies and sort of that whole fat positive movement, because we need that when we're trying to sort of change a paradigm of saying that, we need, people coming out strong in order to make change happen. It sort of happens with every movement. If we look at it in history, whenever we've kind of, we're still working through a lot of the isms out there, but I think sizeism is one of those that we don't acknowledge much, and it just kind of, it's pervasive in our culture. So I think it's great that people are doing that work. And I think the bottom line is we can be healthy. We actually can be healthy at any size. We just need to take good care of our bodies, and you can do that. No matter what, somebody could have gotten into a larger body because of genetics, because of hormonal stuff, because of medicine, because, they had a lifetime of yo-yo dieting, stop that behavior and try to nourish them, but we can't judge them or say that they're unhealthy based on where they are. I think we have to be really careful about that. So, and you know, if anybody has questions about this, I think everybody should look up Reagan Chastain. She is like an amazing, she does a lot of speaking on health at every size and fat positivity and fat acceptance and size acceptance. But she's a marathon runner. She was in the Guinness Book of World Records for the heaviest marathon runner to date. And you can't like, I mean, she's a lovely person too, but you can't like not see this woman doing beautiful yoga poses and running marathons and say she's unhealthy. She has absolutely nothing wrong with her health if she has a clean bill of health when she goes to the doctor. She happens to live in a large body, and so do many individuals. So I think we have to be careful about judging someone's health and wellness based on their size. I think, someone who's a skinny person who just happens to be skinny by birth, but is, smoking and mostly sitting on the couch and not really eating healthfully or consistently, that person is not healthier than someone in a larger body who's taking good care of themselves. So I think we just have to be careful not to make assessments based on size. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. I mean, for me, it is a paradigm shift, but it's an important one. And I want to challenge listeners to allow your brain to like be pliable and get out of the culture that says fat is unhealthy. And I'm working through it myself, like right now. And since, as I read your book, but let's challenge each other to really change our language and work on changing our culture from the ground up for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what encourages disordered eating, is this fear of, if I don't keep my eating in check, I will become this stigmatized group. And so we want to not make that group stigmatized in the first place as much as we can, and we also want to not create so much fear around food that somehow we have to control it or else our bodies are going to become unacceptable. Does that make sense?
Yes. And so, you talk about embodied eating, which is a phrase I'd not heard, but I have often heard mindful eating, which you talk about as well. And I think that's kind of the antidote to all of this, other than changing our language. But man, is it a busy, noisy world out there, Heidi? What can parents do to help their kids eat mindfully? Like, that sounds like a huge challenge to me as a mom of 4.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the most important thing we can do is slow down. Easier said than done. But like even just a moment to pause before everybody digs into their plates. And you don't have, if you're not religious, you don't have to say a blessing, but it can just be a moment of just gratitude that we're all together, for example, before we dig into our food. And to just like appreciate this food that is here and how it got here, like the menu, like how food gets to your house and your some appreciation of it. Cook with your kids. I mean, I don't have to tell you this, Katie, but cook with your kids and prepare food with your kids and ask them questions. How does, do you hear how it is like, how it sounds when you chop that carrot? Like, isn't that interesting? Or look at all the beautiful colors of this salad, or, smell all these herbs as they're putting them in the soup. It's cooking and food is a sensory experience. And I think we don't spend those sensory moments with our food as often as we'd like. And I think we can foster that more with kids, that appreciation of the experience of eating, as opposed to just like, I'm going to gobble and go.
Yeah. And I think in your book, you call this the Zen experience of chopping vegetables. And just really, not that you can't always do it every time, right? We can't slow down every time, but kids should be chopping a little slower anyway. So actually they're at the perfect age and phase to be focusing on how it feels and how it sounds and how it smells. And yeah, especially little children, your toddlers, your preschoolers, yeah, get them in, like hand them the spice jars. What do you think of this smell? And, encourage them to like taste with a pinky fingertip and just see what they think about some bolder flavors, like feta or I don't know what else is bold. Beets are kind of intense. Spinach, whatever. Even if they don't like it, it's important to have those little tastes and be mindful of it. I do love that, just that moment kind of silence and awareness before a meal. I like, as a Christian personally, I like how that connects with, like God says, be thankful for your food. He's actually helping us be healthier too. But I know that in this busy world, sometimes it's like, okay, say grace, go, and you're like standing up and saying it. And so this is a commitment I have made in the past and have fallen out of it. But again, to just remember, like, if it's a grace or a meal blessing or just a moment of gratitude, you should be seated. You should be breathing slowly, right? Like, you can't just say it as you're buzzing by the table. That doesn't really count.
Yeah, well, and just to really appreciate, that like we are actually pretty fortunate. We're pretty privileged to have this food and have it get to us so easily and seamlessly that we almost don't think about it. But just that little bit of presence can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. And now I have to address, because I know we have a lot of people in our community, a lot of people in our country, really, where kids do have genuine food allergies, food sensitivities, or foods that are just triggers for them for particular behaviors that hurt their learning or hurt their social life. So how, in your philosophy, we're kind of like trying to be really chill about food and not restrict things. But what if you have to? How do you manage that along with the healthy relationship with food?
Well, I think helping kids to understand why they might need to restrict a food is important, so that they're not just doing it because mom and dad said I can't eat this, but that they understand what the consequences are. And, obviously if it's a life-threatening allergy, or if there's, if somebody has celiac disease and they need to not eat gluten because it's dangerous to their digestive system, then that's very different than just having an imposed restriction from the family. So I think, I think kids inherently understand that if there's something that they shouldn't have for health reasons, like that they're going to work on that. And they, they'll make do, right? And I think if you can have alternatives for your kids so that they don't feel deprived, because I think that deprivation mindset is the one thing that you really want to avoid. It's why diets don't work. That we sort of like feel deprived and then we can't sustain the restriction. So I think ultimately, like if someone's allergic to dairy, for example, you show up to the birthday party with a little coconut milk ice cream and say, can you give this to my, son so that he can actually partake of the cake and ice cream too? So it's like the more parents can do to sort of help kids not feel so deprived, but also teach them about how this is one really important way that you're taking care of your body by avoiding something that you're allergic to.
Sure.
It's very different.
Yeah. So knowledge is step one, and then thinking of it less of a restriction and more of a substitution in a way, like you say, they're still involved in life. Oh, this has been so helpful, Heidi. I know people are really gonna think of this interview as one of their favorites. But we got to end the interview with something incredibly practical. So I'm all about giving parents something they can, walk away from this interview and just do right away to improve their parenting and their kids' relationship with food. So what would you say would be like just that one little step that's like totally actionable?
Well, I would say that probably, I'm thinking of two. Well, I think can I do two?
You can do two. I always get two flavors of ice cream on one cone. I'm totally that kind of girl.
Okay, I am too. So one is about you as a parent, and the other is maybe about how you address your kid. So, and they're a little bit less about food and more about the whole person, if that makes sense. One is I would recommend, this is a brave step for a lot of people, but like throwing out your scale, so that you don't measure your own body and that of your family with numbers, that you actually connect more to how you feel to determine whether or not you're healthy. and not use a number on an arbitrary number on a scale that nobody else sees as like a measure for whether you're doing well or not, both as an eater and as a human being. So, and then teach that, by example to your kids. So that's one thing. I'm like, again, that was a brave, that's going to be a brave step for a lot of people.
It's a big challenge, but man, it's a yes or no. Like either you're doing this one or you're not. There's no like, I'm sort of kind of going to try.
Yeah. And if you have, and I say if you have trouble with it, get some help. Like, I mean, I work with my clients often in nutrition therapy, like with steps like that just feel too scary. And sometimes you have to like weigh yourself less and then hide it and then finally smash it. And then I guess secondly, for how you look at your kids, this also has a little bit to do with more of a holistic view. Try to be careful about making lots of comments about your kids' appearance, even positive things. Doesn't mean you can't compliment your, daughter when she does, braids her hair really nicely or anything like that. But be careful about having the greeting that you give to children often, like, oh, you look great. You can even be careful about this with your friends, so that like the measure of, again, someone's worth is not, appearance is not the number one, thing in the forefront when you interact with your kids, that you're sort of like appreciating them as whole people and all their other qualities, as opposed to appearance. Because I like our media, like will put a lot of emphasis on appearance. Their peers will put a lot of emphasis on appearance because that's what happens around puberty, for example. There's so much emphasis on appearance in the world. And so if you can repeatedly kind of bring up things like, oh, like that was so thoughtful of you. I can see that you're a really, really good friend. Or, oh, like, that was like such a wise choice that you made. Like, I appreciate that you really, your friends, this kind of thought. Point out the things about your child that you love about them that are not about how they look, more often, at least like 2 or 3 times more than any kind of a compliment about how they look. And I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, that is an excellent challenge. Now, you mentioned like greeting, and the examples you gave are perfect for like when you're in the moment and when you're responding to things kids are doing. But there is that moment with friends or with your kids when they come down the stairs, from getting out of bed, that greeting, that's interesting. Like, do you think it is acceptable or appropriate to say, oh, good morning, like, thank you for your smile, or you look joyful today, or like because it almost has to be almost appearance if you say anything because you're not in conversation with them yet. Do you think that works? Like just commenting on like your joy or your spirit?
That doesn't sound problematic at all to me. Like, I appreciate your joy this morning or your smile. That's very different than saying like, oh, you look so pretty, like to a little girl when she walks in the room, which is interesting too. If you watch at like holiday gatherings, it's often the little girls that get those comments more than the boys.
Totally.
Yeah. So I think, that's a good observation to make, and to also to sort of shift in yourself. Like, can we greet each other, even our, with our friends, with like saying, oh, it's so good to see you. Like this, it's so nice to see you, instead of like, oh, your hair looks great, or what, does it always have to be about appearance? And I think, this is just one aspect of, of what encourages disordered eating. I mean, obviously our, sort of the focus on health in the media and the way we kind of create morality around food is a problem. But I think a really simple thing that we can do is just appreciate each other on a more deep level and really work with our kids in that way. And I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, we do that. When you just said, it's so good to see you, I thought, well, yeah, duh. Of course, that's what you say when you meet someone. It's kind of old fashioned, though. I feel like that's what people say in books. And it's totally not what people say now, but it's what we should. That's a great challenge. Like, it's so good to see you. It's been so long. How are you? Or with your children, maybe, good morning, Gabe. It's going to be a great day today. Or good morning, Gabe. Are you excited about school today? there's a million positive things you could say that have nothing to do with appearance. I love that challenge. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a challenge because we are conditioned a little bit to, and we're visual creatures. Like some of it is just the way we're wired. We're visual, and there's a reason why we're wired that way, and there's an evolutionary part of it. So it's, I think we have to be kind to ourselves and just know, like, we're working with our kind of funky brains, and I think just be like, oh, I guess I could say something different next time, is much the wrong thing. So, yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you for all of this inspiration, all of this encouragement, and just I feel like I've had an infusion of knowledge today. So we definitely appreciate it here. And you guys, listeners, definitely look up Heidi, look up her book, Nourish, which is found on Amazon, and at her website. We'll make sure that there's links below so make sure you can find that book, because it's really, really a good read. And as you can tell, challenging our parenting, and really challenging us to level up and to be more intentional, and I think better parents and raising healthier kids. So again, thank you so much, Heidi.
Oh, thank you so much, Katie, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and listeners, we'll see you again next week for more expert interviews, recipe demos, and just basic encouragement on being that great parent and raising healthy, independent kids. It's what we all want, but we know that we can't do it alone, so we need support, and that is what I am here to dig up for you and serve every week. So thank you very much.